Hello and welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is Matt.
And my name is James.
And this week on the show, we've got a special bonus episode. We're taking a little break from our time travel series to talk to you about Skylines, the third film in the Skyline trilogy that's being released on VOD on the 18th of December. We got a chance to speak to writer and director Liam O'Donnell about the movie. So we'll be playing that interview at the end of the episode. But we wanted to talk about the film and give it a little review.
Rose Corley, General wants to see you.
There is only one thing harder than winning a war.
Keeping the peace.
For the past 5 years, we coexisted peacefully. Until now. If we don't find a solution, 3 billion will die. However, we crack their navigation. We're embarking on the first mission to their world. You've been blessed with the ability to interact with alien tech. And I want you to join us. Give them a taste of their own medicine.
That's it? Oh, so you have half a plan.
Yeah, best.
This was a really interesting one because it's been building up towards this third film a bit. And it's kind of like, it's a bit of a sleeper film that I don't think a lot of sci-fi fans have found out about, but the ones that do have had a lot of fun watching these sort of like these Skyline films. So had you ever heard of Skyline before at all, Matt?
Yeah, I remember the first Skyline when it came out, but I can't remember if I actually saw it when it came out. I remember that it kind of got a bit squashed by Battle Los Angeles, which is a bigger budget movie with exactly the same premise that came out the same year. It wasn't so well received critically. But then Beyond Skylines came out like 7 years later. There was a huge gap. And when that movie came out, I was like, oh yeah, Skyline. Oh, they made a sequel to that 7 years later. Did you watch either of the films when they came out?
Yeah, so I watched them again before we chatted to Liam. And I'd never seen the second one, but I remember watching the first one way back when on Netflix. It must have been just me looking for sci-fi films to watch on like a Saturday night or something like that. And I must have come across it then. So like bits of it I remember, but I know what you mean. It's an interesting one because it's got all that sort of like alien invasion stuff in there, as do the other films. But that one kind of like, it focused on the reality of like a big cataclysm, some sort of like big emergency, like the alien invasion's happening. We're focusing on these real people dealing with it. And then it went to sort of like the more sort of space opera stuff towards the end with the sort of like, when you've got more of the aliens in there and there's sort of like the big thing about the aliens taking human brains and then putting them in these pilot bodies. So when that happened at the end of Skyline, I was like, oh, this is suddenly like perked my interest because you know me, I love all that sort of like kind of verging on sci-fi fantasy stuff and sort of kind of thing. So like when I saw that, I was like, what could happen next? I didn't think it would get a sequel. Beyond Skyline, like it's bonkers, but such a fun watch. There's so much going on in that film. It's like you've got kung fu. It's like kung fu sci-fi, isn't it? I think that's what a lot of people have sort of like coined the phrase for this film. And you see more of it in Skylines, don't you?
Yeah, they bring back the kung fu. I could have gone with a little bit more of the kung fu in the third movie. There's a lot in the second movie because they've got like their two main stunt coordinators on the second movie were also two of the main characters. Well, not main characters, but two big characters in the film. So they're kind of on there doing their own like martial arts choreography, and that was really cool. There's not a lot of space for it in the third film because they go. There's more alien territory stuff in the third film, so there's a bit less room for the kung fu characters to do their thing, but it was nice to see that coming back in the third movie again.
And we haven't really touched on alien invasion films at all, have we? Like that's going to be like a future subgenre we're going to be looking at in the series, but it was quite nice to look at this sort of like subgenre of alien invasions in this trilogy. What did you think about the way that they portrayed that in these films and in Skylines, the newest one?
Well, like you were saying, the first one's kind of trying to look at the reality of the situation and how you would, how some, I want to say normal LA people would react, but I guess there's no such thing as a normal LA person, as the first film illustrates. It's like a rapper, and is he a rapper? Donald Faison in that film, I think he is. And his like mate from school that's kind of getting drawn into it. But I don't know, like in terms of how they work, I thought the second film was more interesting in how it does that. I think the first film's very by the book alien invasion story. The alien invasion happens and the characters are dealing with it right in the moment. And like you said, it's right at the end of the first movie. They just throw a load of crazy concepts in like the last 5 minutes. And then the second movie is just all those crazy concepts getting thrown at it even more, and even more weird stuff happens, and there's kung fu. I did quite like that in the second one, that it just gets a bit silly, to be honest, but it's fun. And then they're kind of flipping it on its head in terms of the alien invasion stuff in the third film, where the plot is more about like taking the fight back to the aliens. I don't know, do you think that's a good arc for an alien invasion trilogy?
I think it's an interesting way to go, because I don't know because I wouldn't know where to go with these films, because obviously if you focus too much on just the alien invasions the whole time, you've got nowhere to go and you kind of dig yourself a hole. But in this third one, they've got a whole part of the storyline where they're going to the alien planet. So you're finding a bit more out about sort of like what these aliens are up to. But I mean, the thing with these films as well, they're very sort of like unpretentious, I would say. They sort of like, they do what they say on the tin. So it's like, you know what you're getting when you go into these films. They're like fun and action-packed, and you kind of have to sort of like suspend your disbelief with them as well, because I know we're sort of like really into sort of like the low-budget, high-concept sci-fi, but I think there is something to be said for these like sort of like almost more sort of like B-movie kind of like lower-budget sci-fi films. You can have so much fun with just going into these and sort of like just losing yourself in the special effects and in sort of like the creatures and sort of all the action stuff. So I think that's what you go to this film for, like all the action and the effects of it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think they really celebrate their creature design and their special effects. And the special effects they are decent for the budget that these movies have. They are relatively low budget for Hollywood films. And I think that's because they've got their genesis from the Strauss brothers, who directed the first one, and they directed Aliens versus Predator, and they've got all the like special effects experience. So they've kind of got that that DNA to the films that lets them have, I think better special effects than a film of this budget would normally have. And that's something that we talked to Liam O'Donnell about, and he'll get into that in the interview. But yeah, it's cool to see that, and it's fun to see films that are able to do that.
I did like the fact they mixed the sort of like the CGI with the practical effects as well, because they did have like proper alien suits that some of these guys are running around in. And they've got these in Beyond Skyline and Skylines at the end with the credits. They've got like a sort of like a bloopers roll. So you can see a bit more about how they were made and sort of like the fun they were having on set. And I think that's sort of like all of that enjoyment that they had making the film kind of like permeates into the film itself, because it's just like they finally got a chance to do a big sci-fi flick. And that's what they're doing with it. They're having fun with it. They're sort of like throwing all this stuff at it.
I think they are having a bit of fun with it. I think you're right. And part of that fun, I think, for the filmmakers, certainly in the writing and directing of this, is the kind of throwbacks to other sci-fi films. I mean, Aliens is the big one in this third film. They go to the alien planet in the third film, and they're going in like a bunch of soldiers, and it does feel very Space Marines on LV 426, doesn't it? Where they go back to back. It's all dark, and the aliens are like kind of hiding in the shadows and stuff like that. So I think that some of that enjoyment as a filmmaker must also come from just calling back to the films that you love and doing similar things to stuff that you enjoy in sci-fi. And that comes through in the third film.
And it did remind me of there's the Alien versus Predator books. So I know Liam worked on Alien versus Predator Requiem. So the Alien versus Predator books, there's a whole little story arc in one of them where there's a human woman who ends up going to the Predator planet and sort of like becoming a predator, basically. So it's like bits of that. I think they've taken some of those ideas and put them into the Skyline story. So like they've got bits of that happening in Skylines, and they've got sort of like the usual sort of alien human hybrid thing. And I think like you said, you see that in sort of like the Alien franchise and stuff. And they treat it in quite, it's quite like an interesting thing to have in the mix of all this alien invasion stuff. What did you think about the casting? Because they've got quite an eclectic cast of people in this, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, the big one for me was Alexander Siddig, Dr. Bashir from Deep Space Nine. He's playing like a senior military figure for the humans in this film, and I think he's having a lot of fun with it as well, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of British talent in the film, though, isn't there?
Yeah, and James Cosmo as well. I recognised him from Game of Thrones. He's one of the Night Watch guys in that.
Yeah, he's one of the senior figures of the Night's Watch, but I can't remember which one. But if you watch Game of Thrones, as soon as he comes on screen, you'll be like, hey, it's that guy.
Yeah, I mean, that was the most recent thing that I recognised him from, but I know he's been in a lot of other films, and he is one of those actors who you recognise when you see him in a film, and you're like, oh, where have I seen that guy from? And then you're instantly on IMDb trying to look at everything they've been in.
Yeah, but I think he's, I don't know, he is one of those actors that I think he's been in a ton of stuff, but I think anyone who's been in Game of Thrones will just forever be whoever their Game of Thrones character is, right?
I mean, that's like, it's going to happen, isn't it? Because it was just such a long-running series.
And what about Lindsay Morgan, who is the hero of the film? She's playing Rose, the child from the second movie, who's grown up rapidly fast with special alien abilities. I
like the idea of her character as being sort of like having the alien hybrid side of it in there. And with her being sort of like a hybrid, there's what did you think of the red-blue signifying thing that they've got in that? Because they kind of set this up in the... Did they set this up in the second one?
They might even set it up in the first one.
Yeah, that if they've got red eyes, they're good, and if they've got blue eyes, they're evil.
It's handy. Yeah. That's helpful for the audience.
It's good. You need to know which is which.
Yeah, she's kind of like hacking all the blue light stuff. The blue lights is like one of the interesting concepts from the first film. It's like it brainwashes anybody that sees it to be harvested by the aliens. God, there's so many concepts in these films. We've got aliens harvesting humans, brainwashing. Rose is like a child who grows up super fast. She's like a hybrid. There's a lot going on.
There's like military politics going on.
Yeah.
There's different factions in the third one. We won't go into that too much. No spoilers.
And there's things on the planet. There's new types of aliens, and I don't want to talk too much about them to spoil the film, but it gets into other sci-fi tropes from other classic sci-fi films that we've already mentioned in these like new breeds of aliens that they have to fight. And
I think we've talked about sort of like a lot of the influences and that kind of thing. Like you can tell that Liam is a sci-fi fan. He's put that into the film. And when we chatted to him, he sort of like talks a little bit more about that, doesn't he?
Yeah, so I think we should get into our interview with him and play that for our listeners now.
Yeah, let's listen to the man himself, Liam O'Donnell, chat to us about Skylines. So today we are very lucky to have writer and director of Skylines, Liam O'Donnell, on the show. Liam, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Good stuff. So you've been working on this project for at least 10 years now, so you must be feeling a real mix of emotions, sort of finally getting the chance to close out the Skylines trilogy. How are you feeling right now?
Yeah, I think I got an email last weekend from Alexander Siddig, and he'd finally watched the movie, and he said some really sweet things, and I was like, can I just rest now? Like, is my imposter syndrome gone? Like, am I just done? I think I just want to take a month to just like lay in bed. Yeah.
A well-earned rest, I think.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's, it's a trilogy loosely in a way to me. And each one I try to make like a new movie and kind of do a new genre. So to me, I could keep making them. They're really, really fun to do. And they're kind of like my favorite type of movies to watch, let alone make. So I'm having a blast.
Yeah, they're great fun. They're so action packed. One of the things we wanted to ask about as well is how much of the sort of like the trilogy did you have planned out? Like, did you know where you were going to go from the first Skyline to where you are now with Skylines?
No, I think it's like at the end of each one, almost in post, we usually get a question of either from like a financier or producer, like what would the next one be, which is obviously a good sign that people are happy and they want to, make another one. So for the first one, that was like, oh, well, I think we already knew that it needed to go in a more action orientated direction. So the kernel of Mark and Trent for part 2 was already in our heads in post of what I wanted to do there. And then that movie, it took longer for the sequel to get made. So it all kind of changed. But that general kernel of like, okay, we're going to have a cop be the one in the next one. That's going to be more action oriented direction. And then we were like, we've set this woman up in part 1 as being pregnant, and that's why she gets put into this other chamber. So they're doing something to the babies on the ship. And then like, I think at the end of part 2, we had the baby being born. And so once we kind of changed the sequel and it became much more like a Frank Grillo vehicle, we had the baby born earlier so that we had this kind of lone wolf and cub thing where he's carrying this baby around a ship, which is a lot of fun. And then the very end of that movie, we had finished it. Because the first movie was such a cliffhanger, the second one, I just ended with them like walking off to the sunset. I didn't have a tease at all. And we tested it and people were like, what the fuck is this? where does the next sequel go? So it was like, too hot, too cold, trying to find the right balance. And, because we had this little girl, Rose, who was growing so fast, we needed to resolve that she had found some type of stasis and well-being. So that's where the wraparounds came with Lindsay Morgan playing the adult version of the character. And once I got to work with her, I just was like, there's a whole dynamic here. Like, I feel like that was because she is this like John Connor meets Sarah Connor savior type character. It just felt like a very natural lead for the narrative to all hinge on her actions and her story. So I think that's why, each movie has like a very different personality. And for me, they feel like they get stronger as they go because we have this kind of like the most important person in the universe is the lead character in this one. And she kind of drives everything. And I had a lot of fun just writing her, let alone then getting to work with Lindsay in creating that character and that arc. And to me, I just kind of love those characters in general.
You mentioned that process of creating them as standalone films and, going in a different direction with each one of them. The first movie is a real classic alien invasion story. And then with Skylines, we're kind of at the complete other end of the spectrum. What made you want to invert the whole alien invasion plot and flip it on its head?
Well, it's something I think I've always wanted to do. One of the first movies I got to work on was Aliens vs. Predator 2. And so I was really steeped I was helping the directors do their pitch and just kind of watching the old Alien movies over and over again, for inspiration. And to me, it just felt like such a no-brainer that an AVP movie should be having a plot line like this, It's like, why is like the most popular film in the series have Space Marines and like you can't get Space Marines back into the goddamn franchise? Like it was just always just seemed like a no-brainer to me. So that was, it's like an itch I wanted to scratch. And then when I was working on Beyond Skyline and we had this like international team of badass stuntmen work on that movie, that was sort of inspiring. I'm like, okay, like a team of international badasses going to the alien planet. That's a movie. How do I get there? Because I didn't really have the main character. And then once we had adult Rose and she's like got these superpowers and she's leading the fleet at the end, I was like, oh, I felt like I had my in now. And so the story kind of all flowed pretty organically after that.
Yeah, it was exciting to see Yayan Ruhian return for the third one. That mix of you've got your Space Marines, you've got your Kung Fu, that mix of action.
We have a bonkers sort of brand, and I felt like we weren't bonkers enough. And for availability, he happened to be available, and I was like, fuck it, we're gonna write him in. And it kind of really neatly fit with Dr. Mal. And I just kind of love that, like, why does like Dr. Mal, like Rhoda Mitra and Yayan Ruhian have like this intimate relationship in an alien invasion movie, and they kick ass together, and that to me is worth celebrating.
Speaking of the brand that you've got for the film and the franchise as a whole, you know, the landscape of franchise films over the last 10 years that you've been working on this, it's been really dominated by the likes of Marvel and Disney and huge studios like that. How did you keep the momentum behind the Skyline franchise going behind the scenes? I
really don't even think we did. You know, we kind of like we kind of dropped the ball for the first 3 years after the first one, and then it was like it obviously had a pretty mixed, and that's being polite, reception. And then it went on Netflix. We had one of the early Netflix deals where it skipped like HBO and TV and was on Netflix for 3 years. And then after the Netflix deal ended and it was on like Spike TV and Sci-Fi channel is when I watched it again. I didn't watch it for like 3 years. And that's when I was like, you know, that treatment we have for the sequel is pretty awesome. These creatures are really fucking cool. Like I'd kill to direct this. So that was what I went back to the brothers and was like, you know, we were been waiting for someone to actually finance the script. And I said, like, I'll just write this script. I'll just spec it if I can direct it. And they said, yeah, sure, go ahead. You know, it was kind of sitting there. No one was doing anything. So I worked on that for that year. And then I wrote it for Frank Grillo. I was a big fan of Warrior. And I thought like he was kind of the perfect guy that you would want to be on a subway car with when the alien invasion happened. Like he's the absolute perfect presence for that. And so then, you know, we just lucked out that he in the meantime, all of a sudden his star was rising. He's in Winter Soldier. He's the star of Purge Anarchy. And we happened to catch him that, you know, we were flexible in Beyond Skyline that we were going to kind of shoot around his schedule because he had like 2 other movies that he did in that interim. So that production was like 6 months long where we would shoot and then we would stop and then we would shoot again around Frank's schedule, which was just kind of the old thing. Like that movie, like we finished a version a year earlier than when it got released. It was just one of those movies that took forever. And even when we finished it, the studio didn't want to release it for another like 7 or 8 months. So that one, I felt like, man, we were really stuck in the mud on momentum because I really wanted it to come out in like 2016, even 2015. But it came out in 2017 and people were just like, what the fuck is this? You know, we had kind of a hill to climb to win people over. But I do think having such a cool cast, you know, with Frank, Iko, Yayan, Boyana, it was just like, it was a very different flavor and it was much more action orientated. So then from kind of, and then we kind of hit the festival circuit and then had a long-term Netflix deal. So it still kind of stayed in the conscious. That's the great thing about being on Netflix is that people are watching it every single day and they're discovering it all the time. And it's kind of a unique film. So it sticks out whether you love it or hate it. It's like, it can't really be ignored. So that to then get the momentum for part 3 was actually almost easier in a weird way because it felt like everyone who made part 2 with us was really happy with the results and they kind of wanted in again. You know, Vertical Entertainment specifically was a great partner.
So obviously, like you've built up all this momentum with Skylines, and obviously there's science fiction films, and we do a science fiction podcast. Are you planning to stick with sci-fi for like future projects? Have you got like ideas for other sort of sci-fi subgenres you want to look into for other films?
Yeah, it's kind of like I said, it's like my favorite. It's my favorite genre. It's my favorite thing to watch. It's my favorite thing to make. It'd be hard to imagine doing something without it because it's just what gets my juices flowing. You know, there's like, I think I almost more like genre though, because there are like, I have one project that's like a World War II set Arctic adventure survival film. It's like a Dances with Wolves meets Jaws, but it's more just a creature. So it's not exactly science fiction, but at the same time, I love working with creature effects. That type of thing gets me really excited. The other one was a post-apocalyptic science fiction combat film that was, kind of like set in Indonesia after a worldwide cataclysm. And that one is called, that's like The Last Savage, that the John Wick writer, Derek Kolstad, came on and did a rewrite with me. And that one, I'm like, I'm dying to get that one made, but it just reads like it's $100 million. But the thing is, the Skyline movies do too. So I'm always trying to explain to people that, like, yes, I know it reads like a lot of money, but we can actually pull this off for the budget. So that's kind of that's always where I'm at. Is like I always want to try to swing for the fences, ambition wise.
Those sound really exciting. And yeah, the Skyline films kind of punch above their weight, budget wise and effects wise. Where does that come from? Is that the Strauss brothers and the hydraulics history, or?
Yeah, I mean, I guess they that's where I started, and so that was always sort of instilled in me that was the way we did things. But then even this third one, we didn't do at hydraulics. It was a UK co-production. We used lip sync visual effects out of Soho. And Red VFX was another one in London that did a lot of great work for us towards the end. So, that's where I think that sort of comes from. But I think it's also like, it's just a little bit like I said, like, what makes you passionate, what gets you excited. And it's like, it's almost like it's part of the thrill for me to try to like see how far I can push it and how much I can get away with and back myself into like as hard of a corner as possible. And can I push through? So yeah, I feel like I'd be probably more successful and more personally wealthy if I didn't do it that way, but I can't seem to help myself.
Well, you're the producer as well, so you've got to be the money man as well as the director.
Well, yeah, it's like like in this one, I actually started my own VFX company for some of the shots. So I was working on the VFX myself. And I couldn't even stay within my own budget. So yeah, like I said, it would have been nice to have been able to actually get the fee that I was supposed to get for myself. But I still wanted the artist to make the work as great as possible. So.
And it is great. Skylines is like such a great film, and what you've done with it is brilliant. So last couple of questions we just wanted to ask as well. So we're doing a series on time travel films specifically at the moment. What would you say your favorite time travel film is, first off?
Interesting. There's been a lot of great ones. Obviously, it's a Back to the Future, but in the Terminator series, Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 is what I definitely would have to go with. I think it's like, in a way, it created the genre for me in a weird way. Because I mean, obviously those two movies were like, along with Predator, I was a huge Arnold fan and still am, obviously, but he was like my gateway to everything, my parents wouldn't let me watch R-rated movies, so I would watch them on like the TV matinees. And so like when Terminator 2 came out was when they finally just gave up. I was like 9-10 years old. It was like they couldn't stop me anymore. So yeah, I'd have to say that it would definitely be Terminator 1 and 2 as a double feature. That's me.
Well, this is the last question then. I kind of think I know the answer to this one already. What is your favorite sci-fi film of all time, regardless of subgenre?
It's hard. It's hard to that. What is my favorite sci-fi?
You can have a few
film?
if you can't think of one.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Aliens is way up there, and if you watch Skylines, it wears its love for James Cameron's films on its sleeve. But I was just talking to my friend about like what we were saying, like what is the best Arnold movie? Because I saw a list on there, and it was hard to argue as like maybe it is Total Recall, because Terminator, he's not really the lead. He's Linda Hamilton's the lead of the first one. The second one, it's kind of a trio of leads with Edward Furlong, her, and him. And I was like Total Recall is like the full Arnold. And so there's something about that as just such a comfort food. And then I'd say like the R-rated movie that was, I think, the first R-rated movie I ever saw that really made me fall in love with alien movies in general is the first Predator. And I love the ensemble in that movie and in the writing and just kind of the progressive of these super macho dudes that get completely taken down by the savagery each step of the way. And Mac, his grisly demise was I was just had to write this thing about how that was kind of like the scarred for life moment. Like you never forget your first brain explosion, your first head explosion, like slapping right into camera. So yeah, if I go with like what my favorite comfort food is, it's all from like 1981 to 1991. Like that from like Terminator to Total Recall and Terminator 2 or all that is kind of where my heart is. And that was a little bit of my advice to writers right now in sci-fi is that, you can watch the movies now, which I love the Marvel movies, but like, they're not good models for low budget filmmaking at all. They're these massive previs set pieces that are like almost impossible to storyboard out. There's all these moving parts, once they begin, there's, all these different environments. They're like 5 million a piece. But if you go back and you really study films like Aliens, films like Predator, films like Terminator, I mean, fucking genius, low budget sci-fi filmmaking. That's where you should go back for your inspiration because of their limitations. They had to use what they could and they had to really pick their spots for the VFX. They couldn't just blast it everywhere. So as big as this movie is and ambitious it is, it's about, a third of what a big movie's VFX would be. Even the way we cut it, I would have to just be like, I'm going to stay on their face as they're hurtling through space. And I'm going to do one shot of the creature out in space. It's not going to be like 5 different ones. And then even sometimes I would like make it one shot and then intercut it later so that it cut down on costs. So it's like some of that stuff is that analog filmmaking, I think is a lot of the key to learning how to make these things on a low budget.
Liam, we're singing from the same hymn sheet here. We love James Cameron, we love Arnie, and we love low budget sci-fi. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been great talking to you, and we wish you all the best with the release of Skylines.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Anytime. Loved it.
Thank you.
So that was Liam O'Donnell there talking about Skylines. That was a really interesting conversation. It was cool to talk to him about some of the low budget stuff that he has to go through as a filmmaker. And I really liked hearing him talk about, having to be the producer and the director at the same time. It's a tricky position to be in, especially on a low budget film. It's not like a $500 million Marvel production where, there's lots of different people's interests being represented financially, let's say.
Yeah, definitely. And I really like the fact that he pointed out that new sci-fi directors should look to older films to sort of figure out how best to utilize their budgets, because I think that's such an important thing to do as a director, because he's exactly right in what he's saying. Like, not everybody can have these crazy Marvel budgets, and you can create an interesting film with like homages to other films that you've loved as a kid on a lower budget.
Yeah, he mentioned Terminator specifically, and I guess I just never really thought about it as a low budget sci-fi film, because I get, like, in my head, a James Cameron film would never be a low budget movie, but I guess it is, like, and they do get away with an awful lot without the money of Terminator 2 or the rest of his films after that.
Yeah, I think you're right, because when you think of the Terminator franchise, you think of Terminator 2 and you think of like all of the technological advances they had to do all the sort of like liquid metal stuff in that. And then you do forget just how low budget and how Terminator was like one of James Cameron's like first films where he first got the chance to like properly make something.
Yeah, it was cool to hear him kind of reference all those things that he liked, because that's all there in the DNA of the Skyline films, I think. And it's exciting to hear about the next projects he's looking at doing. He's obviously got like a real thing for Indonesian kung fu, because he must have these relationships with these actors, and he's got these ideas for other films he wants to do with them. So a post-apocalyptic kung fu movie.
I mean, if you know guys which can do those kind of stunts, you would get them in every film you're making, wouldn't you?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I absolutely would.
And I love the fact he was such a massive Arnie fan as well, because like the amount of times we talked about Arnie on the show, it was just good to sort of like share that common interest. So like we said at the start of the show, Skylines is available on VOD from the 18th of December 2020, in case you're listening back to this episode. So you can find it on there. And if you're in the UK, you can watch the other 2 Skyline films on Netflix. That's how we watch them. They're on there, so you can catch up on the trilogy. But that's about it from us. If you want to get in contact with us, as always, you can find us on social media. We are at Through Sci-Fi or at Through Sci-Fi Pod. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We've got a Facebook discussion group. You can come and join that and come and talk to other fans of the podcast. So yeah, come and join us, come and chat.
And in the spirit of new sci-fi, we've got another treat coming up for you this week. We're going to be releasing another bonus episode with our roundup of the London Sci-Fi Film Festival last week. So keep an eye out for that in your podcast feeds. And then after that, it's back to your regularly scheduled time travel programming.
That's it from us. We'll see you next time.